Hi, I'm Ross Ramsey, the executive editor of the Texas Tribune. Thanks for tuning in to our conversation on redistricting challenges and priorities. This is part of the Texas Tribune's symposium previewing Texas's 2021 legislative session. I'm joined today by State Senator Joan Huffman and State Representative Phil King. Senator Huffman is a Houston Republican. She has represented Senate District 17 since 2009. She serves as chair of the Senate's Select Committee on Redistricting, vice chair of its Criminal Justice Committee, and is also a member of the Finance, Administration, and State Affairs Committees. Mr. King is a Republican from Weatherford. He has represented House District 61 since 1999. He serves as chair of the Redistricting Committee and as a member of the State Affairs and Criminal Jurisprudence Committees. Let's get started here with just sort of from the top on redistricting. How do you think this is going to roll out? What's the general outline? Senator, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I would start out by saying, number one is there's a lot of unknowns, and I think we will start the session with those unknowns still there. A lot of that, of course, has to do with the pandemic and the timelines that have been pushed back because of census gathering, a change, I think, also perhaps in the presidential administration, and just overall, the world's changed, right, in 2020, and all that's going to affect us in session. So I think the goal of the Senate is to continue forward as if the numbers were going to come in on time and be as prepared as possible and hope for the best. So that's kind of where we are right now.
So you do think there's a chance the numbers come in on time? The lieutenant governor said earlier this year that senators should be prepared to work through the summer and into September if this goes to special sessions. Do you think it comes to that? Do you think we might get this in a regular?
Well, there's going to be a practicality involved in that. If we don't get the numbers, I would say kind of a drop dead date by really pushing it would be mid-April. It will be impossible to get it done just because of the amount of time it will take to actually draw the maps with the numbers coming in late, but also just because of legislative timelines and having, of course, to send the bills from one chamber to the next. So it becomes extremely difficult to complete this task in 6 weeks. I do think it's safe to say that no matter what happens, I think it's unlikely we could get the congressional and the SBOE maps drawn during regular session, no matter the scenario, because the numbers are coming so late. Even in the best scenario, if we got them, say, on April 1st, historically, we've gotten those numbers earlier in Texas, so that's enabled us to get a head start. So I would say that if the numbers come in before April 15th at the absolute latest, we could perhaps get the maps drawn, legislative maps drawn in regular session. But I think we're looking at special sessions for the congressional and SBO maps no matter what.
We have a question from a reader, Penny, who wants to see if we can just explain the process of redistricting. How does this unfold? Mr. King, you've been through this. I guess this is your third rodeo. If you could just sort of in layman's terms, just kind of walk us through how this works.
Sure. It's a great question. The intent of redistricting is really very simple. The Constitution and statute just requires that after each decennial census, that we simply rebalance all the voting districts for Congress, Texas House, Texas Senate, State Board of Education. We can do appellate courts as well, trial courts. So the idea is kind of that idea of one person, one vote, where if you've got population growth, and just for round numbers, let's say you've got a district that's got 50,000 people in it, and the one next door has grown quickly, and now it's got 100,000 people in it. And so the voter in that district with 50,000 population, their vote's now worth twice as much as the voter in the 100,000 population district. So the idea is just to rebalance that, where they've just both got 75,000, and that's one person, one vote. That's just leveling out the playing field. Where it gets real complicated is when you add in all the layers of law and politics and public interest that come involved. For example, on top of that rebalancing, that one person, one vote, we have to overlay the Voting Rights Act, which prohibits you from taking into consideration, or which prohibits you from harming any voter's rights based on language, group, or race. And so there's a lot of very confusing law out on and differing case law. So, for example, the one person, one vote 14th Amendment says you cannot take race into consideration when drawing a district. On the other hand, the Voting Rights Act says you have to take race and language group into consideration when drawing districts. So there's a real balancing act there. And that's where almost all the court cases come from, is that struggle there. And then on top of that, the courts require us to overlay again what they call traditional redistricting criteria. And that can be anything. That's communities of interest. That's a historic neighborhood that has always been together and voted together. That's a municipal boundaries. It can be a school district. It can be anything, even an economic zone like the Rio Grande Valley or the port areas, that anything that hold people together. So that's the framework that you have to do redistricting within. Now, practically what ends up happening is you always go into it knowing you're going to see a lot of lawsuits. We're still in litigation today from 2011. 2011, we're still in court from 2001 and 2003.
Kind of a never-ending story, isn't it?
Oh, it is. But in terms of how you actually do it, it's really a puzzle. You take the outline of the state of Texas. It's just like building a puzzle. You've got some counties where all the districts for Senate or House are going to be within that county. And you draw the lines for that county and you get agreement within there, and then you drop that piece in. You do that, they call them drop-in counties. You do it for all the major counties. Then you break the area down into regions, North Central Texas, East, West, and you have to draw the maps with agreement from the representatives or senators within those areas. So once you actually sit down to do it, it's much like drawing like building a puzzle that you do at your kitchen table, but you have to do it with all the legal considerations, the population considerations, and then, of course, all the political considerations.
So the one constant in redistricting is that the districts have to be, in the case of Congress, exactly the same size. In the case of the House and Senate, about the same size. And the way Texas is growing, that looks like we're going to have another round, Senator, of moving representation from the country into the suburbs and into the urban areas. So, most of the growth in Texas is in that triangle that's got Dallas-Fort Worth at the top and Houston on one corner and San Antonio, Austin on another corner. In the Senate, what do you tell your rural colleagues? Some of them seem to be losing ground here.
Well, I think the Senate is committed to respecting the rights of our rural voters. We certainly understand the important part that the rural communities play in our economy and in the nation and the products that they produce for the good of Texas. So we're certainly going to respect the rights of the rural voters. Yes, you're right. The population is where you see it growing, and the state has grown to probably 29 million people. And yes, the population is centered, the growth west of Houston primarily, and then north of in the Metroplex area. But actually, every Senate district has grown. It's just they've grown at different rates. So the state continues to attract new folks, and but some of them do move out to the rural areas. So as we draw these maps, and we have a little different approach in the Senate because we have 31 senators. We don't have 150 members that we have to work with. So I don't know if that makes the task more difficult or makes it easier, but we will be respecting all of our Senate districts as we move forward and try to see how the population best fits into these Senate districts.
Okay. One of the things in the census conversation, both before the census began this year and as it's continued, is whether the counts will be full, whether all the people in all of the states will be counted. And Texas is one of the states that, at least in that conversation, has been seen as maybe going to have an undercount, which would influence the number of people that we had representing us in Congress. I think early projections were that we would get 3 new seats in addition to the 36 House seats that we currently have. And then how things would go in terms of federal aid over the next 10 years based on the count, everything from vaccines to highway funds to school funds and all of that. Representative King, are you worried about the count here? And how much do you think Texas congressional delegation will grow and how this counting game is going to play out. It's still, I guess, in contest to some extent.
Yeah, there's actually 6 federal lawsuits filed right now, and at the hearing last week ago Monday, before the Supreme Court, the Census Bureau testified that they weren't going to be able to get the apportionment data to the president. That's where they just assign the number of congressional seats to each state. Not going to be able to get it to the president by the end of the year as they were supposed to. So I think everything's going to get backed up. In terms of did we get a full count, that's something Senator Huffman and I worked on a lot this summer, because early on in the summer, Texas's response rate was so low that instead of us gaining 2 or 3, probably 3 congressional seats, we were on track to lose 2. It was that bad. A lot due to COVID, a lot of other reasons. We got the state to spend $15 million out of COVID funds to do an outreach program. We got the cities, counties, everybody we could get involved in notifying the public. We are now caught up to where we have what the Census Bureau calls a full count, which is 99%. However, a new wrinkle has just arisen. We've noticed in the last few weeks that the Census Bureau spokesman has quit talking in terms of people counted to household counted. And they're also talking about the need to delay possibly to get all the data worked through. So I'm beginning to question if they really believe they got that full count they think they did, because they're not talking about how many people, they're talking about how many households and not how many people in a household. So I'm a little bit nervous there. But what we want in Texas, Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, we want everybody counted, because that's in the best interest of Texas.
Senator, what's your confidence level in the full count?
Well, I'm with Phil. The last we heard was it was 99.99 plus. And then last week or so, there was a little bit of pushback about whether the count was complete nationwide and whether it could be delivered to the president, which of course would slow down the delivery to the states. So I think there's still some unknowns. Like Representative King says, we want a full and fair, complete count. That's the number one priority. And as we move forward, that's what we will be looking for. I still think the numbers could come in depending on what happens in January. I think we'll know more by mid-January to late January. I still think the numbers could come in. If I had to guess, I would say between April 15th or April 1st in a wonderful world through about mid-July. And of course, when those numbers come in, will drive who gets to draw the maps, whether it be the legislature or the legislative redistricting board. And that will be driven specifically by when we receive those numbers from the Census Bureau.
Okay. What are these maps going to look like? I know that you can't say, it's going to have your house over here and their house over there. We have, after this election, about the same count in the legislature we had before this election. We have 83 and 67 Republican advantage in the House. The Republicans have an advantage in the Senate. We should expect basically to get Republican maps, right, for the House, Senate, congressional districts. If the state's voting Republican, this is going to be a Republican map for 10 years, right? Senator, you want to try that?
I would say the data is going to drive what the maps look like. So right. As the numbers come in, we will look to see where the population is growing. That would apply both to legislative maps and congressional maps. And from there, we will make the appropriate changes that need to be made to make sure that the maps are constitutional in their apportionment, and proceed on from there. I mean, we do have a Republican legislature that will be drawing the maps, but we will be driven by the data and the law and what is required under both the state and the federal constitution and the redistricting case law, which, as Representative King said, has been, being developed for many years and still being developed as we speak, actually.
But you can't really take the politics out of this, can you? It's pretty much going to be Republican maps, right?
I'll say the data and the population will drive the maps.
Let me try you on this, Representative King. Is there any chance you're going to get Democratic maps out of this legislature?
At the beginning of every hearing, I always say this, that the committee's job is to follow the law. Sometimes it's a little confusing what that is, but to do the best we can to strictly follow the law, to have a very, very transparent process so that the public can participate and that all legislators can participate and so that everybody knows what's going on. And then third is to be fair. And it's the data that drives what's fair or not. I think you obviously have political considerations. And frankly, the Supreme Court says it's okay to have political considerations.
Right.
But again, our first job is to follow the law, to be transparent, and to be fair. And I know we're all going to try to do the best we can to keep those communities of interest together. We had 14 hearings so far, and at each one, that's what the majority of the testimony was. Hey, we want our city to have a single congressional member, or we want our this traditional neighborhood to stay together and not be divided. And so I know we're going to give a lot of attention to that in the House and the Senate.
There was a lot of attention in the litigation that, as you said, is still going on about the current maps over splitting up places like Austin, which I think has pieces of 5 congressional seats, for example. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about when you're talking about communities of interest? And is there a chance that you get maps after this that are similar, or has that argument changed over time?
Well, Travis County is a great example, Austin. So you have multiple congressional members representing Travis County.
Right.
And some people really like that because they say, wow, I've got 3 congressional members I can go to or whatever. Others say, no, we just want all of Travis County in a single congressional district because that congressional member will be paying all their attention just to Travis County. So you get it from both sides without any politics or law or anything else involved. Some people would just rather have multiple congressional members representing them. In my House district in 2 counties, I have 2 congressional members, and that works great. 10 years ago, I had 1 congressional member. That worked great too.
Okay. One of the things that COVID has blown up this time was you had scheduled something like 35 hearings. And, one of the ways that the legislature builds its redistricting maps and the arguments about redistricting is by talking to the public and going all over the state and holding public hearings. I think you got just past half of those done before March. And I'm curious in practical terms and in, political terms, these are political maps. What does that mean for drawing the maps? Is there a way to make up that lost ground, or are there particular holes in the testimony that you've already collected that you need to correct as you go forward, Senator?
Well, the Senate I had a planned series of regional hearings throughout the state throughout last summer and spring. And of course, unfortunately, those were all canceled because senators not being able to travel, but also the venues were not able to host us for those events. So what we plan to do as we move forward is I will have a redistricting resolution that I will present to the Senate, probably the first or second day of session, probably the first, where I'm going to ask the senators to vote to allow me to hold a series of regional meetings virtually. So the senators will be present, probably in the chamber. They're working on getting the technology ready for me. And then we will hold hearings where the public will will be able to testify from their homes or their office, wherever they may be. Try to do it. Maybe we'll have one for El Paso, one for the Valley, one for the Panhandle, et cetera, so that we can start gathering that very, very important public testimony that you refer to that is so far been, a gap in the evidence that we've started to collect. So I feel like we will be able to get this done in an efficient way and give the public a lot of opportunity to participate in the process. And it may be that being able to do it from their homes or their businesses will actually be a process that works better than going actually to these different regions. So I'm hoping that will encourage the public to participate. We'll be making an outreach to make sure that the public knows about it. And I'll be asking legislators to help me get that message out through their social media. And hopefully the Trib will be happy to help us with that. and get some of the public participating virtually through January, February, and March. That's the goal.
All right. Representative King, is the House on something like that track? Same kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly. In fact, I've got a rule. I just hung up from the House parliamentarian not an hour ago trying to draft some kind of change in our rules that will allow us to have regional, whether it's digital or whether it's me going out with my committee clerk and having the House committee on a board behind us on some type of Zoom screen with the public, or whether we're doing it all digitally connecting. But yes, we've got to have more hearings. It's very important. The Capitol is going to be a little more difficult to get into because of COVID. People don't want to travel. Members can't travel as much in the middle of session, but we definitely want to finish our hearings.
Okay, that plays right nicely into this question from Christy. How do we monitor and weigh in on redistricting? I guess you get in those public hearings if you can, but as this goes, redistricting is one of those things, like a lot of bills in the legislature, it goes really, really slow until it starts to go really, really fast. How do you watch this thing? How do you weigh in as a regular member of the public, Senator?
Well, we have a portal that we have opened through the Senate redistricting website, a public portal where they can offer testimony, any form that they want to submit it. That's shared through Dropbox with all the members of the committee, and really all members of the Senate have access to that Dropbox and that information. So they can start submitting information to us. Again, depending on when we get the numbers, that will drive the number of other types of public hearings that we can have. We just don't know what the world is going to look like in March, April, May, or maybe we'll be there in June and July doing it. I know we all hope and pray that the vaccine will take an effect and maybe the world will start opening up again. And if so, then we'll respond accordingly with trying to get to the public. But we will be making many efforts to reach to the public, and the public just needs to understand, send us the information. It will be part of the record. It will be part of what the senators will consider. And I certainly will look and consider prior to starting to draw these maps. So we'll be looking at it before we start drawing the maps. And once we get the numbers and we start to have some maps out there for the public to look at, we will do everything in our power to include the public in this process.
Okay. One last thing before we go, I've got several questions from folks here about nonpartisan redistricting, about redistricting boards that we've seen other states adopt in an effort to make this very political process either less political or look less political. Representative King, do you see anything like that in Texas's future, a nonpartisan redistricting board or a non-legislative redistricting board, and why or why not?
No, I don't think so. We're a representative form of government, and I think for the legislature to delegate that responsibility, my voters in my district, I know, want me to work on redistricting, not somebody that they didn't have the chance to elect or participate in the appointment of. And then also, if you look at all the other states, and I've looked at them where they have boards or commissions in different configurations, it ends up being just as litigious and frankly, just as political, because somebody's still making the appointments and then there's arguments over who that's going to be. And then people are trying to influence them for their districts. And so it really hasn't fixed anything. So we've got as good a system as you can be. Democracy's representative government is sometimes a little bit of a struggle, but it's the best system we've got.
Senator, you want to crack at that one? You see a commission like that in Texas?
I agree with. I don't see it in the near future. I agree with Phil that our constituents want accountability for what they consider one of the most important tasks that we will be performing as legislators. And I've seen very little evidence that the process does not become political in other ways, that through boards and so forth. So I don't see it in our immediate future in Texas, no.
Okay. I appreciate your time, both of you. I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in, and thank Senator Huffman and Representative King for joining us. Thanks.
Glad to do it. Thanks.
Thank you.